The Basement, Part 1, Night Terrors, written by Jared Susie. So it happened back in 2005. My name is Sean, and my wife, Jane, and I were searching for a house made for a family of 3, soon to be 4, with a baby due in about a month. We have a son, Julian, who was only 5 at the time, and with a bad stutter, which means whenever he spoke, he stuttered. We worked with him, and he was slowly making progress. Back to the story. We were looking through the newspaper for any houses that were for sale, specifically for sale, since we got our credit up enough for it. Then we finally ran across one, double story with 2 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, and a large family room. Looking at that picture, it was love at first sight. We just had to give the realtor a call, and so we did. I should mention that the price for the house was oddly low. For a house that big, that was shocking. But we didn't care. The house was huge, and for a low price, why the hell not? I should also mention that I don't believe in ghosts or any of that bullshit. At least, I didn't at the time. And the newspapers supported many photos of the interior, so we weren't in for a ripoff. We just knew it. A couple of days later, we finally got to the house, and like I said earlier, love at first sight. I might have been a skeptic, but I believed in love at first sight. That's how I say Jane and I got together. We met with the realtor, who we'll call Susan. She seemed very excited to see us, like she forgot to take her ADHD meds. She was very ecstatic to shake our hands. "Hell, you guys must be the Newmans. Am I right?" "Yes, you are," I replied. "And you are?" She had a moment to think, as if she didn't even know her own name. It was odd, but I didn't think anything of it. "Susan," she finally replied. I honestly don't know if she was lying, or she had just hesitated to give her identity to 2 strangers. But that doesn't matter. We could tell that she was very anxious to get to the house, so that's exactly what we did. When we finally got inside, it didn't disappoint. The interior was exactly how it looked in the newspaper, just in color. And way better. It was beautiful. Lovely antique wallpaper, shiny wood floors, a staircase leading up to the 2nd floor. It was practically a dream come true. We were finally gonna get out of the 2-bedroom piece of junk trailer that we lived in and live in a much larger house. After Susan showed us around, we agreed to buying because we just loved what we seen. After we left, I couldn't help but remember on the ride back home that Susan, she kept making eye contact with the wall beneath the staircase and would look away if I noticed. I'm not sure if Jane noticed at all, but I sure did, and I was weirded out. But I just let it go. That night, we were eating around the dinner table. My wife and I decided to tell our son Julian that we got the house, and boy, was he excited. He jumped to his feet and hugged us both. It was a few days later that we were about to spend our first night in the house. We had new beds placed in the rooms, all except one room that would be the nursery. We were all excited to live there, but Julian, who was a complete ball of joy, was more excited, obviously. He was running around the house, taking in all the new rooms and their large size. It was amazing. We later had to ask him to stop because we didn't want him to trip at the staircase and fall, because that would be bad, and that was the last thing we needed. That night, we all just ate delivered pizza from Domino's and watched a movie in the family room. But when I looked over at Julian, I noticed that he was doing the same as Susan was just a few days ago, staring at the wall below the staircase. "What is he looking at?" I said in my mind. I had no clue what he could be looking at. There was nothing on the wall except for an electrical outlet. I slightly nudged him with my elbow and asked him, "Hey bud, what are you looking at?" He looked at me and back over to the wall, then back to the television. "Nothing," he responded. I didn't get it, but again, I just let it go. When we all finally started to go to bed, Julian came to our room, looking a little nervous. Jane asked him what was wrong, and he answered, of course, stuttering like he usually does. I don't want to sleep by myself." We both just figured it was because it was a new house. We still had to get adjusted to it, especially him. Jane got out of bed and walked him back to his room, staying in there until he fell asleep. Kids, am I right? Oh well, I have to get some sleep because I need to be up early tomorrow to go to work. How fun. Later on that night, after I fell asleep, I was having the most fantastic dream, when the feeling of being uncomfortable woke me up. I didn't open my eyes, but I started to notice that the bed was harder than usual. I opened my eyes and leaned up, looking around. I'm on the floor, right next to the staircase. That's odd. Maybe I slept walked down here, but that's not at all what my dream was about. I looked over to the wall below the staircase and got a little eerie feeling. Something wasn't right. I just passed it off as being half asleep and confused, so I got up and entirely walked my way up back to the bedroom. As I got up to the top of the staircase, I heard the most blood-curdling scream come from Julian's room. My wife was somehow faster to the door than I was. When we entered, we seen him on the bed, and we could tell it was just a night terror. But that didn't stop us from rushing to him. His yelling quickly faded to sobbing as Jane held him against her, gently caressing the hair on the back of his head and shushing him. "Sweetie, it was just a nightmare. Quiet now," my wife whispered to him. His sobbing slowly faded to small weeps. He started saying, with his face still pressed against Jane's shoulder, He came for me." "Who did?" I asked, still assuming it was just a night terror. He turned and looked at me, tears rolling from his eyes. "But Brian did." I didn't know a Brian. Jane didn't know a Brian. I don't think he did either. "Who's Brian?" I asked. "The man from the basement," he responded. Me and Jane looked at each other, confused. We didn't have a basement. Not here or at the other place. "Buddy, we don't have a basement," I added. Yes, we do. Under the staircase." Me and Jane looked back at each other again, still confused. I gently placed my hand on his shoulder in a way to comfort him. "There is no basement here, okay? It was just a bad dream." I could tell by his expression that he was certain there was a basement. There was no basement mentioned in the tour, so I just assumed he was having a night terror. Jane and I both stayed in the room until he fell back asleep. It took him a while, but he did. The next morning, while I was at work, my colleagues mentioned the house during our lunch break. I was telling them about how nice the house was and how much more room there was. One of them snickers and nodded his head. "Oh, buddy, you're in for a lot living there," he said, holding back his obvious laughter. I asked him what he meant by that. Then he turned to me, giving me a half smile, but also a serious gaze. "There was a child murderer living there back in the 80s, he said. "A child murderer?" I asked, in a bit of confusion. "Yeah, a man named Brian who would kidnap children and keep them in his basement." I started assuming something in my head. I formed a wide smile and gave him a skeptical eye, as I always did. "Wait, did my wife put you up to this?" I only assumed that because Jane and him were really good friends back in the day, having had an on and off relationship throughout high school. He gave me a strange look and replied, "What? No, man. I'm telling you what I know, what actually happened." I didn't know whether to believe him or not. I know that some houses have drainage past, but how would he know about my son's night terror? Was he telling the truth, and my son just heard it about the incident on television or something? I have no clue. That night, I returned home to my wife, cooking supper. We did the usual greeting each other with a kiss, and her asking me how my day was, and how it went. I leaned against the counter and sighed. It was fine for the most part, I said. But did you tell Ronnie about Julian's night terror? She gave me a strange look of confusion. No? Why? Well, he mentioned that a man named Brian lived in our house and abducted the kids and hid them in the basement. She found that oddly strange, as much as I did. I told her what I thought, and we both just assumed the same thing, that he'd just seen it on television. That night when we went to bed, Julian came into the room with the same problem he had the other night. This time, I took care of him. I walked him back to his room, and he got into bed. I tucked him in and proceeded to ask him why he was so scared. Why are you so scared to sleep by yourself? But because it's scary here at night, he responded. What's so scary about this house, buddy? There's nothing wrong with it, I added. He sighed, not responding. Is it Brian? I asked him. That got him to look up at me, almost dreading that I said his name. Where'd you hear about him anyway? Did you hear that name on TV? He nodded, telling me that I was wrong. He told me, he replied. He told you? He nodded, agreeing. He leaned back up, grabbing my arm and giving me a sad puppy eyes. Dad, can I come sleep with you guys tonight? I agreed. I knew it would be hard to convince him to stay in his room anyway. Also, I had to get to bed because I had to work again tomorrow. It had been a few days, the same thing happening over and over again. Julian not wanting to sleep in his own room, and his frequent nightmares. It didn't seem to stop. That was until one night. No, his nightmares didn't stop, nor did his need to sleep with us, or something just changed. Something was added to the list, and it had to do with Jane. While I was in bed, we had Julian between us, because as usual he wanted to be in our room. But then I woke to him shaking me awake. Dad, he whispered. Dad. I turned to him as I awoke. What is it? I mumbled, a little annoyed that I was woken. I think there's something wrong with Mom. This instantly alerted me. I leaned up thinking that maybe she was going into labor, but what I seen was still somewhat disturbs me to this day. She was sitting upright in bed, looking straight ahead and mumbling something under her breath. It was at a quick speed, and I couldn't understand a word she was saying. Jane? I said, but I got not a single response from her. I reached over to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. Jane? I said one more time, but still nothing. She kept speaking her gibberish. Dad, what's wrong with Mom? Julian whispered to me again. He looked scared, nervous, and about as confused as I was. I don't know, I replied to him. I got out of bed and walked over to her side. Jane? I said to her again. Still, no response. But then she slowly turned her head toward me and looked me in the eyes. Her mumbling stopped, and her blank expression grew confused. She finally responded, Sean? Jane, what were you doing? I asked her. What do you mean? She asked, because she seriously had no clue what she was doing. Well, I guess that makes sense. I mean, she was probably doing that in her sleep. You were mumbling something, and it didn't make any sense. Do you remember anything of it? I asked her. She nodded, telling me no. No, I don't. That's weird. Yeah, it is. So we proceeded to go back to bed, a little weirded out, but then we were all startled when we heard a loud bang come from downstairs. I looked over at the others to see them as startled as I was. Then it happened again, but in threes. Then again. Then again. I got out of bed, telling Jane and Julian to stay in the room. I left the room, fully unprepared for any type of battle, going into this empty-handed with the possibility of there being an intruder that might be violent. I was scared, but I had to protect my family. I mean, that's what the man is supposed to do, right? I reached the top of the staircase, looking down into the dark living room. I couldn't see anything. Oddly enough, not even the windows, and light always shined through those windows. I reached over and flipped the switch, lighting up the living room and staircase below me. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Nothing to raise red flags, at least. I had my focuses locked on the front door, thinking maybe someone was pounding on the door. But then it happened again. A loud pounding sound that came in threes, but it came from below me. It didn't come from the front door. It came from below the staircase. Now I was frightened, trembling in fear. I never felt so afraid, but I decided to go down the stairs anyway. I stood against the wall expecting it to happen again, but it hasn't. Not yet anyway. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and instantly looked towards the wall below the staircase. What I found shocked me. There was a massive hole in the wall, and it looked like someone took a massive sledgehammer and tore the wall out. Though I didn't see anyone. I neared the hole and peered inside, and there was another staircase. It was leading underground. Was Julian right about the basement? Could it be? I found an old switch on the wall. By old, I mean I had to move thick cobwebs and dust off of it in order to flip the switch. And when I did, the first thing I seen was a basement. A fucking basement. I couldn't believe my eyes. Julian was right. My coworkers, they were right too. I couldn't fucking believe it. God damn it, I was furious. Not with Julian or the coworkers, but Susan, the realtor. She didn't tell us about it. Why didn't she? Why didn't she in the first place? Then I remembered that Julian and the coworkers said something about the basement. How a man named Brian kept kids down there. Maybe that's why Susan didn't tell us. Maybe that's why the house was sold at such a low price. But then I was startled by the creepiest thing I have ever heard come from a basement. Something nobody wants to hear come from a basement. A child's laughter. Hey guys, it's Jared here, the one that wrote the story. I know that this one wasn't really all that dark, wasn't too scary, but I promise you, if you stick around for part 2 of this story, which will be coming next Wednesday, it's gonna be called The Basement still, as always. This one's gonna be called, I can't quite remember. I think it's called The Basement. I don't know. Screw it. I don't know anymore. But I promise you, it will be much darker, and things will start turning different ways in this story, and it's definitely coming next Wednesday. So stick around for then, and see you guys there.